Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Today on Feminine Roadmap Inspires, I am sharing with you my guest, Mindy Tsai. She has written a book called Becoming Whole. She is going to be sharing her story of schizophrenia. We're just passing through Mental Health Awareness Month, and I thought this is a story that really needs to be told because it's something that many people struggle with or someone they love struggles with. And we want to have these open conversations. So Mindy, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Gina, for having me.
It is my pleasure. So of course, this is all about you and your story. So why don't you begin and kind of share with us how you found out you had schizophrenia? What was your journey like?
Yeah, so so a lot of typical cases of schizophrenia, people typically get them in their teens or early 20s or sometimes, and for me, it's a bit of a case where I actually triggered my schizophrenia when I turned 30.
Oh, wow.
That's considered late. So a little bit about what happened. I was getting up, I was getting ready to go to work, and I got up and I started hearing this talking voice. And I thought, that's weird. Who is that person talking to me? And I didn't know where that the voice was coming from. And so I thought maybe it's from next door, maybe it's from outside, let me get dressed. I'm going to go to work and I'm going to step outside of the house and see if I still hear the voice. And the voice was actually in my head, it was a young man's voice talking calmly. And I got out of the house, I opened the front door, I stepped outside, and I paused for like a few seconds. And then, I didn't hear anything, and I say, okay, that was it. And then all of a sudden, I heard a voice, the man's voice again, said, can you hear me? And so I was like, oh my God, this is really someone talking to me. So I smiled. And the voice said, don't smile, you're going to look silly, or, you're going to look strange if you smile and hearing me. And so I, in my head, responded to him without knowing that I was responding to him from my head. And then I walked to work. I didn't think much of it. I just, you didn't think something was wrong. I was just reacting to it,
Yeah.
And, I went to work and the voice disappeared. And that was the very, very first time I heard a voice. You asked me, how did I know that I had it? It was actually, it has been a long journey to actually realizing that I have it. So the first trigger of hearing voice, having strange thoughts and having reactions to noises around me, that took a few months. I was in that state. And so from the voice to finally that I call a friend of mine for help in the middle of the night because I couldn't sleep. And at that point, the talking was 24/7 constant. And so it's actually very hard to function when you have someone talking to you nonstop. And so that was when I called a friend, and he and another friend of mine, very good friends. And then they took me to see a doctor who referred me to a psychiatrist. And that's when I started taking medication. Now, at that point, I didn't understand that I had schizophrenia. I just remember something had happened. There was someone talking to me. I got really sick. I couldn't sleep. I was a little bit anxious. I was a little bit worried. What happened? And so it took me a few more years to actually trying to think about it, trying to understand what happened. And I sort of talked to friends, but I wasn't really open at that time because I was confused. I didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were minor episodes that happened after that, but they're minor. They're not as sort of
dramatic
as the first time that happened.
Mm-hmm.
The first time was a full-on episode. And so I took medication, and I took it for a few more years. And then so that was the first trigger. And then after a few years, at one point, I actually, since I was getting older, I was single. When I turned 36, I wanted to get pregnant by myself as a single mom. So I looked into it. I talked to my psychiatrist. And one of the things I was really worried about was the medication. So he actually told me that it was okay to stop medication while you're trying to do this, which made me feel better. I think, okay, I don't want to pass anything on to anybody undesirably, right?
Right.
So I tried that. It didn't work. And somehow I stayed off medication and something happened again. And that was the second major episode that I had. And that was when I start hearing voices again. I start being very sensitive to different sounds around me again. And my friends, they all saw this and they all were trying very hard to help. Some had different approaches and then the other, there's one sort of set of friends who wanted to do things for me. So they wanted to take me to the doctor. They wanted to send me to the ER. And then there's a second set of friends who sort of wanted to talk. They talked to me more and they tried to find out what was happening with me, even though they were very scared why they were talking to me. And that whole thing I ended up in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, so this time I actually was hospitalized. Even though I didn't feel like the second time was as serious as the first time, I feel like the first time was more dramatic than the second one, for me anyways. But I think for the second time, more of my friends knew what was happening. So it was more of a big deal for everybody. And I was hospitalized, and it was at the hospital where with 24/7 care and doctors constantly talking to you, observing you. And I went to McLean in here, actually, one of the best hospital actually for mental health. And so it was there during my 2-week stay that I finally put it all together. The medication actually helps your brain. The brain actually stops the talking, and that's what it is. For the longest time, I thought there's somebody out there talking to me somehow. But finally at the hospital, I was like, it's me. My brain, amazingly enough, created that. So that's how, sort of in a very sort of brief description of the whole journey that happened to me.
So was that, even when you're on medication, were you struggling with hearing the voices as well, or the medication actually quiets the voices?
I am very lucky in that the first medication I took Zyprexa. I was prescribed Zyprexa, and that worked right away. So with at least for me, the medication, the way it works is that if I don't change my environment, so if I have the same job, same friends, live at the same place, and the doctor prescribed medication to me, the way I like to think about it is that the medication sort of handles the stress level, right? So our stress level goes oscillating up and down.
Yes.
And so you need to have a medication level that covers the peak of that stress level, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if you change jobs, if your job all of a sudden become more stressful, or you all of a sudden gets a dog, or you all of a sudden move into a house with roommates and the stress level changes, sometimes the medication will become not enough, right? So in my history, I was always been okay with the first prescription that I had. I think it was pretty low. I was prescribed a pretty low dosage. So between the first and the second major episode, there were some spikes where I heard some voice, but not constant. And it was very, a small percentage of the time. But when it happened, it did confuse me. I immediately went from sort of this like functioning, working professional woman with friends to like, oh my God, who is talking to me? Like that whole, I immediately goes back to that world again. It's crazy what our brain can do, amazing things and like incredible things as well. And so there were some spikes of stress, and there were some smaller episodes between. And then, interestingly enough, I took a break from work 4 years ago. So there was a period of time where I wasn't working. I was living with family, and I just did yoga and writing. And that was when I was on the lowest dosage of the medication. Immediately after I get a job, I immediately hear, the first time I was stressed at work, I immediately hear voices. And so the doctor basically upped my dosage, and now I've been fine without voices. So I'm lucky in that medication works for me, and it completely sort of takes away the voice for the most part, for 95% of the time. Yeah.
Interesting. So for you, it's triggered by stress, or is that normal that it's triggered by stress?
So there's definitely environmental factors that affects individuals. So for me, I think it's definitely stress level. I can definitely sort of sense that based on what happened in the past. But I think there's also, for me, I think mostly it's like work. Like, you know, if I have a deadline coming up, and there's a new boss and he's, you know, a little bit more aggressive, that sort of triggered last time. And then for the very first time, so that was recent, that was the recent one, right? But for the very, very first time where, you know, how I got schizophrenia.
Right, which is not technically the right term, right? It's when it was triggered, or what word do you use for that? You would say,
I think it's triggered. Like so basically, for someone to get schizophrenia, there are two different factors. One is biological, and one is environmental. So my mother has schizophrenia, and in her side of the family, it's actually, there's been sort of prevalence of mental issues in the family. But we don't talk about it. I never know what happened to my aunts and uncles who has something, you know, it's just something that we didn't talk about.
Right.
And so my mother has later, but we amazingly enough, we never really have a conversation about it deeply either. You know, we know each other, but it's a bit private as well for her. So in my genes, I'm already a little bit more vulnerable to this. And then when I turned 30, I actually broke up with my long-term boyfriend, got laid off from my job, moved into a house living with a roommate for the first time. And it was, everything around me changed completely all at once. And so I think that really sort of create this very strange, you know, I was very curious. I was very optimistic. I was, you know, I look forward to meeting new people. But when someone approached me and they say, "Hi, what's your name?" I had trouble saying my name because I just haven't done, you know how like you always had your friends, and you've been having your friends for the same friends for like 5-6 years, and all of a sudden all of them are gone, and now you have no friends and you're meeting new friends. Like I didn't know how to meet new people. Like it was the oddest thing. And so all the little things, all the little stress, I think just build up over time, over probably 2-3 months, or maybe a little bit longer. The timeline here is a little bit fuzzy. But I was just like, everything around me was new, and I was just like a little bit stressed out. Every day, a little bit more. And I think that finally sort of pushed me over to trigger, you know, whatever it was in my brain.
So it's almost like you were predisposed because of the genetics.
Yeah.
So you had kind of both things happening. You had a bit of a genetic thing, and you had the environmental stress, which kind of pushed that trigger probably.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, you know, sometimes I wonder if I didn't, you know, if I have less, you know, if I didn't change jobs, or if I didn't break up with my boyfriend. But you know what? I talk to my friends and we all agree, you can't think that way. Life is just, you know, forward moving. So, and luckily my experience with schizophrenia is fairly positive. So the voices I hear are all, with the exception of the first male, the young men who I heard from first, everything else after that, all the voices I heard were people I know. So friends, family, my grandmother. So it's all their voices. So it's friendly voices, and their command or the conversation, you know, if you can call those conversations, or all positive, right? It's like, hey, Mindy, you haven't called me for dinner. Call me, give me a call. I want to see you. You know, that's what I heard, right?
Okay.
Or like, you know, a couple friends who's really, really nice. They would say, hey, we're listening to this music. What are you listening to? You know, and so I think unlike the more typical stereotype of what we understand of schizophrenia, which is, you know, killing, violence, evil, all that kind of thing, my imaginary world was friendly and was sort of, you know, friends and family. So that's a
Right.
different, that's I think a little bit different from majority of the people.
But it still was distressing for you, it sounds like, because you never had quiet in you got to the point
Yeah.
where there was never quiet.
Yeah, so the part that stressed me, that's a great question. The part that stressed me is because I couldn't sleep, right? So like during the day, if I hear voices, honestly, what I do, my approach to something I don't understand is I would listen. And so I literally, I think there was one Memorial Day weekend where I heard voices was when I got the new boss, and he was like very aggressive. And so that weekend I start hearing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the voice started talking and it was, you know, work related things that they're saying, you know, it's funny how that's what you're thinking about. That's how it reflects out.
Okay.
And I was sitting at this specific seat right here in my dining room, and I would listen to them. And that doesn't stress me out, listening to them. It just means that I am not living my life. You know what I mean? I'm basically distracted by this whole other thing where I forget to eat, I forget to go out. I still remember the shower for some reason. I think shower is pretty important to me. But like, you
So
know,
your memory gets altered then, like you're not tracking it in time.
no time. Yeah, exactly. You just sit and listens. At least that's my reaction. I just listens, and it just talks, right? Now the issue is, I don't know if you know, but if you don't sleep, and for me, I'm a big sleeper. So if a person doesn't sleep, if they lack sleep for 2-3 to a week, basically your brain activity, they scan people with lack of sleep versus having psychotic episode, the brain imaging is very similar.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
It almost
basically,
puts you in a psychotic state to
it
lack
is,
sleep.
because like you stop functioning, right? And you don't know, your body is like, oh my God, I can't deal with this, right?
Right.
And so basically, I'm already having these sort of signals and synapses and voices, right? Now, if I don't sleep, then it gets worse, right? And so I think the lack of sleep is what stressed me out. The voice itself doesn't, which is the interesting part as well, what they're saying. For some other people, I definitely read books and heard stories from other where the voices is stressful. They give you commands that hurt yourself or hurt other people, and that is awful. I can't even imagine being in that situation. But for me, I think, you know, they were you know, okay.
Kind of supportive, less of an aggressive experience for you.
Yeah.
But it was still disruptive to your life because you were forgetting to eat and do the things you were supposed to do. That's
a great way to put it. Yep. It was disruptive to the normal functioning life. It was taking away. And this I actually realized a lot later, actually, because you know, in the first phase, where I was still trying to figure out what's happening, I would think back to when it first happened when I was 30, and I would think about it, and I would try to reimagining it, and I would trying to like remember the pieces. And then when the second time came around, it was me actively going out to seek and say, oh, I remember something happened at the movie theater. I want to go and remember. It is later that I found out the more time you go through these episodes, the more you're going to damage your brain.
Okay.
And so for me, I had always thought, oh, it happened again. Let me listen to them and see if I can figure it out. And then it would happen again. And I would say, let me listen to it. All that I was doing of trying to figure out actually damaged my brain. And I didn't realize this until later. So, initially I was like, oh, it doesn't really matter what my first doctor was doing. I was not ready. I was trying to figure out what's happening. But you know what? I think there is a cost to gaining awareness, and understanding is so much later. That is something that happened.
So your personal journey of trying to figure out was actually the damaging part, instead of getting help and having an outside
and then
person.
Stop it. Yeah. And actually stop it right away. This whole self-searching, diagnosing and trying to figure it out, it is harmful, actually. I learned that later. So
For schizophrenia specifically?
Yeah, for schizophrenia, definitely. I don't know about for other types of mental conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And my doctor, so for the after I got it when I was 30, for the next I forgot how many, I think next 8 years I have the same doctor, and he was very hands off. Then I got to the hospital, and then now I have a different set of doctors who are a little bit more hands on, and they're I hate to use the word, but they're better.
Right.
And so I think I realize now that having the first set of doctor, even though I was still living a functioning life and going to work, traveling and stuff like that, part of me was still confused. And there is cost to not having the right doctor the first time around. It took me a long while to get better. And that is just, that's just what, that I realized that later. I didn't think it mattered, but it does.
It does matter.
Yeah.
Now, as you're going through this whole process, at what point did you decide to start writing down your journey? And why did you write down your journey? Was that part of, I don't know if healing is something that is a part of schizophrenia per se. Like you catch a cold, you can kind of get over the cold. So this is probably something you have to manage for the rest of your life. Am I right?
Yes. There's, if you get it once and you take medication, and you can actually taper off and get off it. And if it doesn't happen, then you can recover. So there are cases of schizophrenia where you can recover. But if it has happened more than twice or three times, chances are it's a lifelong condition. So for me, since it has happened, over and over and over, for me, it's a lifelong condition. And as far as writing it down, so I always like writing things down since I was little. I kept a diary since, very, very young. I have so many of them. And so my immediate reaction to sort of handling what happened when I was 30, right after that, is I start trying to write, because I was trying to sort through what was in my head. And so I start writing, and it was crazy. I sit down, I open my laptop, and I pull up, a blank sheet, and I literally cannot remember or think of anything to write down. There was I think my brain was stuck. Even though I remember it being a really important event in my life, I couldn't write it. I just didn't know, I didn't know where to begin. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what I heard was, this and that. And that's why it took me actually 8 years to sort of writing pieces down, and I have such good friends. Some of them read the earlier version of what I wrote down just because I like to share with them what happened. And it is a very fragmented story. You know, this voice say something, I did something, I felt something, I saw somebody did this. I went to the bathroom and someone cut in front of me. Was he trying to, it's just little things that you remember and you grab onto it and you're saying, does this mean anything? Is there meaning to this? Or is it just an arbitrary thing? And so that was the first 8 years. And then I got hospitalized. And then I left the hospital and obviously gained more awareness. And so I started wanting to learn more about other people's stories. So I say, okay, books are my go-to. So I said, let me go to the bookstore. I went to all the local bookstores in Boston and found all the stories I could find, all the books I could find on schizophrenia, and started reading them. So The Center Cannot Hold, Quiet Room, there are lots and lots of them. And I read it and and I realized the stories that's been told were all, to me, they were all about, the therapy session, the doctors, my family. And I didn't sort of see a story that talks about the schizophrenia experience itself. So, I thought, hey, I can write down what I heard and I can present this story as what I experienced directly, just honest, direct, factual sort of what happened. And I want to share that with my friends and say, I would love for you to tell me, if you were me, what would you do? Because I try to do my best when I was experiencing this. And it's basically when you experience something that's abnormal, you have to come up with new things to react to it, right? So, I hear voices, I can't turn it off. I don't know where it's coming from. What do you do? And so that's basically why I wanted to put the story down to share with my friends. And then I read the memoir Glass Castle, such a great memoir. And that was the first time I thought I could actually put my story into a book and share it with more people. Not just my friends, not just my family, but maybe with people who, could use another voice of schizophrenia. And so that's sort of how the writing journey came about.
That's amazing. Really, to find and to fight to find the clarity in that process. What was that like for you? Because it sounds like when schizophrenia is happening in your mind, that there's a fragmentation that happens. Is that what I understand?
Yeah. And part of it is the fragmentation. Part of it is, for example, yesterday I had a conversation with my colleague. I don't remember all that's said, right? We sort of just remember the point of that. So with schizophrenia, when you hear the talking, it's actually a little bit hard to remember all that was said, right? And then especially I also have reaction to it. So basically, the voice sounds like it's from outside of me, right? It doesn't sound like it's from my brain because I can't tell that it's from my brain. So when I hear it, my first reaction is, okay, is there a microphone? Is there a speaker? Where is that coming from, right? But if I'm at home, I know that I don't have other things. And so it's hearing it, trying to listen to it, but at the same time trying to figure out where it's coming from. So you're thinking about all these different things. And then when the first time I triggered schizophrenia, there was also more that was going on than the voice, than the talking. The talking wasn't always all the time at the beginning. At the beginning, it was actually not that much. At the beginning, I think it was my anxiety that was building up that I mentioned earlier. So basically, let's just say I go to a restaurant and I'm having a dinner. I'm having dinner with a girlfriend, for example. Someone would walk by and they would be, cleaning with the broomstick or whatever. They're cleaning the floor, and the sound would somehow bother me because I was hypersensitive to all the noise around me. So instead of listening to my friend and being able to have a conversation, I was distracted by that noise. And then I might be distracted by the conversation that people are having next to us. And I would be listening to what they're saying instead of what my friend is saying. And then I might be hearing, the door closed at the front of the restaurant, and then hearing that and say, oh, is someone, what is that noise, right? So it's like a lot of different noises, a lot of just me being a little bit more sensitive than usual, which is very interesting because, right now in my normal state, I can filter out the noise, right? Like I don't know if you know, the Boston houses have the old steam pipe, the heater. So, and when the winter comes, it starts banging really loudly, right? So that kind of voice, sometimes I don't even hear it now, but when I'm in the hypersensitive state, I can hear all the noises.
And that's connected specifically to when your schizophrenia is triggered.
When I'm in that
hypersensitivity.
Yeah, it's one of my, for me, it's one of my symptoms. Yeah.
Okay.
My brain cannot filter out noise anymore. Like, you know what I mean? I think our brain is so great because it can focus and then it can filter out the rest of the noise, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When I'm in that state, I'm unable to filter. So, yeah. So, for example, maybe there's like birds outside now, making noises, or, the wind and the wind and then the steam heater, stuff like that. I don't have it now, but so when I was trying to write, it was all the different pieces that I felt confused about that I had to sort through.
Yeah.
So it was the talking, it was the, seeing people gesturing. So for example, I am walking on the street and someone looked at me and touched their nose. And so I would think to myself, oh, is he trying to say something to me? Why touch nose? Does that mean, and I would say, oh, maybe that meant think about it or something like that. Like literally I was very sensitive, hypersensitive to, gestures and sounds and, all those things.
So it's almost like the world became very symbolic for you. Everything that you saw or heard had some purpose.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then once I take the medication, it's, I think it takes away the voice, but there was a period of time where I actually went outside and said, with the gesture and the hypersensitivity, I actually had to correct myself. So the voice, I can't do anything about. I can't turn it off. I tried all different things. I tried earplug and, all that stuff. I tried many, many things. I couldn't do it. That's one thing that the medication, I have to take medication for it. But the, touching nose, the sounds, that I feel like I can correct myself. So there was once when I went out and someone, touched, someone honked behind me and I couldn't see. And so when I was sick, I would have been like, oh my God, is someone angry at me, right? Honking. And then I say to myself, no, turn around, look at the car, look who's honking and look at why they're honking, right? So there's part of it is, I think what they call delusional thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's called delusional thinking, where you think the logic of your train of thought is not quite right.
So you end up with a story, but you believe the story.
You believe the story, right? And so I had to correct myself and say, hey, look at it. Doesn't make sense. Gesturing, that only happens in the movies. This is not a movie. Da 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 da. And so that actually helped me sort of remove some of that as well for my sort of remembering of what happened. Yeah. So, I think it's, and then later on when I went to the hospital, it was 2 weeks inpatient hospital and then 2 weeks outpatient. And so the outpatient hospital was not doctors and nurses, it was classes. And basically they called group therapy classes.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned a lot from McLean as well. And one of the things they talked about was the CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, where they talk about, how do you identify the source of your thinking? How do you then figure out sort of, your reaction to that is, and then how do you adjust your thinking, right?
So it's kind of like tools and strategies to help you not be delusional in your thought processes.
Yeah.
Like when you're not in that state of schizophrenia, just your normal life, you're basically, it sounds like you're kind of reversing the effects of the schizophrenia by finding that normal level of thinking again. You're getting the tool.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. And I think the CBT approach is not just for schizophrenia. I think it's anybody who's sort of the thinking part of it, right? So it's it makes a lot of sense when I heard about it. So that was great.
So what part of your journey, whether you want to call it healing or processing or leveling, I don't know what term you use, did the book play for you? Once you got to that second set of doctors, that second experience, what shifted and how did that book become part of your next journey?
Yeah. So I think the being able to articulate what I've been through, the writing process for me was very therapeutic. I know that at the beginning you were asking about that, right? So the writing process, the fact that I went through, 20, 30 iterations of this book, it actually helped me figure out what is it that I've been through and what does it mean to me having been through that. And so being able to put it in a book and said, okay, here's what I want to share. And I think I got all the important things I want to say to everybody, to whoever wants to read it. I think it's been a long writing journey of going over and over and over of what did I hear? What did I say? And then there was a period of time where I was like, I wish I didn't say that, a bit of a regret actually happened. Yeah. It was like, I wish I didn't do this, or I wish I was not this. And then it was acceptance. Well, I now have taken that and I've changed and I've improved to sort of putting it all together in a book. And it's funny that you asked this question because when the day the book was published, when I got my first copy, it felt like closure for me. I feel like, okay, the schizophrenia journey of my life has now been complete. I know that it's still with me, but the confusion and the wondering and the why and and the how and all that, I think all that has sort of finally settled. And now I'm saying, okay, I am done with that episode, that first psychotic episode. I can let go. And amazingly enough, I'm starting to forget some of the things that happened when I was 30. But it's been such a long time where I cling onto it and say, okay, when I heard that guy, why didn't I do something different? Why didn't, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You kind of were second guessing yourself as if you had done something wrong in that experience.
Yeah. And then, because it was so many, I used to say it was like 1,000 things that happened. And I was questioning all the 1,000 things that I'd done. Mm-hmm. And now I'm not. I stopped when the book was in my hand. I said, you know what, this is good. I'm good with it. I'm okay. I am okay now. So.
How did that did that support your schizophrenia being healthier and letting those things go? Because that's stress, right? When you're focused on that kind of thing, you're kind of keeping it alive, are you not?
Yeah, so this is a little bit, this is my perspective, not medical,
Right.
not clinical. So I think your brain is sort of trained to think about certain things certain way. And so there's these path, this
Yes.
is what I read about, right? The path.
Neural pathways, yes.
Neural pathways, right? Now, I think the fact that I let go of them, those paths could potentially be replaced by new thoughts, right? And so I'm lucky in that for the most part of my life, I've been functioning, working, have friends, traveling, and all that. But now I feel like it is mostly gone. And medication, I take medication every day, 1 pill a day before I go to bed, and it keeps me healthy. So I am, for the most part, not under any, I'm not experiencing any positive or negative symptoms at all, which is really, really fortunate. And so as long as I, stay in touch with my doctor, make sure I watch any sort of change in environment that could cause a different level of stress, I think I'm in a good state right now.
That's incredible. And really this journey overall, what positive things do you take away from this journey for you?
Yeah, I think number one, I have incredible friends and family. They did not leave me alone. They came knocking on my door over and over again, including my ex-boyfriend, Chris, who was also helping a lot. So I think just the typical perception of people abandoning other people, I didn't experience that. My friends are amazing, and I think the love, support that I felt, even when I was very confused and I was sort of pushing them away, they didn't let me down. And then second, I'm very thankful that I am able to articulate this story. I know that there are a lot of people who has schizophrenia who are not as fortunate to be able to talk about it, to be able to understand it, to be able to put it in words, right? I think there's a lot of people going through it, and it's not, sometimes the medication doesn't work for them. Sometimes they are not in a stable living situation. Sometimes they don't have access to the great doctor that I had.
Right.
So the fact that I have all these enabled me to put it into words, into a book that I can say, okay, I want to share this and I want to talk about it,
Mm-hmm. So that's really important. If somebody knows somebody who's struggling with schizophrenia, it sounds like you're encouraging them to step up, step in, because you said some of your friends were scared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they still stayed with you. What was it that made them scared?
Yeah, I think they were scared of my safety. So I don't think any of my friends thought I was violent. That's just not my personality. But I think they were definitely they're also imagining what could happen. Right. Yeah. So here I am at home, and I remember one time, it was probably 2-3 o'clock at night, and I woke up and I woke up, crying. And I think my body was so stressed that it was, crying at night, that I woke up, but I was confused about the crying because I mentally, I wasn't crying. I just woke up. And so I got confused, and I called a friend of mine, and I said, oh, hi. And she was like, oh, what's wrong? Right. And I say, oh, nothing, don't worry about it. And then I think we stopped the phone call. She didn't sleep the whole night because she was so worried for me. And the next day she came right over and took me to the hospital, right? And so, to the ER, not the hospital. So there was also, and there was also one time, I think, I was at work. I left work early. And so a friend of mine was like, oh, that's so unlike me to leave work in the middle of the day. What's happening? And then they were looking for me, right? And so there was just, it's, I think, yeah, it just, I think they
Kind
were,
of not knowing, right? Because we
yeah,
hear stories about
imagine,
schizophrenia.
yeah, because one of the friend actually was in contact with another person at work, and that person's wife was a psychiatrist, and so they were also talking to professionals to try to get advice. And so I think one of the advice they got was, oh my God, she's hearing voices. You have to take her to the ER. It's very dangerous, very, and so I think there was also other people saying, this is very serious. You got to act now. Whereas I was just, sitting in my living room, listening to talking. But, there's just so much going on that I think they didn't, at the beginning, we didn't really talk, and they also didn't, I also wasn't as
Open with it.
open. Well, I haven't find the words to talk about it. And so they were guessing, and I was trying to figure things out. So that was a bit, stressful for everybody. So I think they were just, very scared for my safety. But now I think it's interesting now. If I'm a little bit stressed or a little bit, quiet or something, my friends keep an eye on me. So they still, yeah.
So where are you at in your journey now?
So the journey now is I want to obviously try to present schizophrenia in a way that is a little bit more than the typical stereotype of ideas that we have about it. I want to add one more voice to the mixed, and so I'm hoping that by sharing my story in detail, more people can understand more about schizophrenia.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much, Mindy. What an incredible journey, and I honor you for that, being willing to speak about something that a lot of people are either intimidated by, afraid of, or ashamed of, because it is really something outside of our normal understanding. So I want to honor you for stepping up, for pushing through, and then being willing to share your story with the world, because I think it really has the potential to really help a lot of people.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, and I wish you great success. And of course, for those of you who are watching this video, I will have a link to that book below. So make sure that you click to subscribe, click to check out this book, and share it with those people that you love. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.